So
My source tonight.
next story I want to cover is Hassan and I were right about the U.S. abandoning Ukraine. And this was always expected, chat. This was always expected. And this is part of the reason why I was in favor of a diplomatic solution very early, like years ago. I was like, we should be looking for a diplomatic solution. We should be trying to, hey, guarantee that Ukraine won't join NATO. You know, that's not because I want that because I like that. It's because it's a material analysis of what's actually going to happen. And I know what the United States does with foreign countries like this. We use them up. We use them to attack our enemies. And then we throw them to the fucking wolves. And that's exactly what we did to the Kurds in northern Iraq and Syria and Turkey. We're throwing them to the fucking wolves. We don't need them anymore. So they're gone. Same thing. That's the exact same thing we did with the Vietnamese. That's the exact same thing we did with the Ukrainians. We're going to use you up. And then when we're done, we're going to say, I don't want to play with this toy anymore, and throw these people to the wolves. It happens time and time and time. We got a DGGer. Ooh, I can't wait. Ooh, wait. We have a DGGer. Oh my God. I can't wait for the backfired as Hassan is too soy to watch it. I watched it. Denim's watched it. Bad Empanado watched it. And we thought we made fun of it. And it didn't hurt Hassan one bit. It helped Denims and I get even bigger. Thank you, by the way, Ethan Klein. I know you're watching, Ethan. I know you're watching, Ethan. I just want to say thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. Thank you. I didn't have as many October 7th leavers as Hassan. But what I will say is thank you, brother. Best month ever. February 2025. Let's go. Ooh, I'm now the 202nd largest English channel. Thank you, Ethan. Keep talking about. You should post some more Instagram stories of me. Thank you, brother. Comrade Geck. Holy shit, that's 10 gifted subs, chat. If you enjoy the content, if you love to see us winning, if you love the fact that every of 100 people that are watching Just Chatting in the entire world, 1% of them are watching the Central Committee stream. We got 0.41% of all English language Twitch users right now live watching us. We are absolutely exploding. So if you enjoy, Vio, what is this? You gave me a pie. Thank you, Vio. Congratulations on Grandmaster. Life is good for me, chat. Life is good for me. Vio just gave me a pie. A piece of pie. She's like, Mike, be plump. Be plump, Mike. Be plump, Mike. Have a piece of pie. Unasked for. The DGGers, man. The DGGers are pushing Ethan to attack me. And all I can say is thank you. It's like when Destiny said, I'm not talking about Mike anymore. He just uses me. I was at like, I don't know, 305 viewers. Then I was like, thanks. Thanks. Oh no, the Sex Pest fans don't like me. Pie so good he missed the 50. Oh! Somebody dropped a 50 bomb? Stopped giving a shit. Dropped a 50 bomb. Let's fucking go. Holy shit, chat. Sub count. This is incredible. This is incredible. 75. 35. I have to be in the top, like, What's the, okay, how many subs does it say I have? Okay, it says I have 6,000. That's way off. Oh no, okay, that's pretty close. I have 6,814 subscribers and 7,535 sub points. So where am I in the total rank of subs? Like I gotta be like pretty high, right? I've got like more than Miskiff. Maybe I'm not in this ranking. I don't know. I don't know if I'm in this ranking. Yeah, this ranking. I don't know if I'm in this ranking. Current active subs. I mean, I should be. Maybe I scrolled past myself. I don't know. The ranking's broken. But like nearing the top 100 in subs, nearing like just about to break into the top 200. Thank you, Ethan Klein. You are my best friend. You pay my rent. Thank you, Ethan Klein. I now make more than Dan. Thank you. Thank you, Ethan Klein. Eclipse ORZ. Thank you for the 5 tier 1s. Do you think that frustrates Dan? Do you think that frustrates Dan, like that I make more than him? Like he's part of a much bigger channel, but because he's got a ruthless capitalist boss that keeps him in line, do you think that bothers him? That I just based biddy Soviet Cranberry with the 4,000 bits. So do you think that bothers him at all? I don't know. All I would say to Dan is consider quitting. You know what I mean? Like consider quitting and starting your own thing. I'll help you, man. I'll help you out. Shake the jiggly for the biddy. Hey, hell yeah, dude. It bothered Anna that I have 7540 subs. 7541 now. I still believe in Dan Hope and Dan Redemption. Me too. Like Dan can lie about me and slander me, but the thing is, like, as a ascended person, as a person who is like who knows the truth about myself, nothing the like slop content people are going to say to me is going to do anything but embarrass them. Now, I'm not saying that I don't feel dramatic and personal and profound emotional distress. I may feel that from time to time, especially when I'm filing my lawsuits. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I always feel profound distress. I always feel profound distress by them slandering me. Launch failure. Thank you for the 10 tier 1s. Are you talking about SpaceX? I'm in a constant state of fear and anxiety. I was feeling a little anxious last night. I don't usually feel anxious, but sometimes I do. It happens. I was feeling like anxious last night. And I hate that about myself, you know. Sometimes everybody once in a while just gets a little bit of anxiety, you know. There's just something, it's like something in the back of your mind you forgot to do, you know. It's just the way it goes sometimes. And all you know what you need to do? You just take a nice, you know what I took? I took a nice long shower. We see your despair when you encounter profound stupidity. That's the thing that really gets me. That's the thing that gets me is like, when I look at somebody like Dan, he's not capable of actually understanding somebody else's point of view. He's not curious to find things out. He creates very simplified narratives about people, and then he adopts that in their mind. And it's like, that's a whole ass person, man. You just created a myth in your mind about that person to justify you mistreating them, right? You were looking for excuses to stab Frogan in the back, to stab me in the back, to attack Denims, to attack Hassan, who was your friend that you knew. That's truly low. Which Dan are we talking about? The H3 Dan. Credit me for the comfort food. Thank you, Vio. He uses tanky as a slur. They said they saw Hassan as family. Yeah. Just like a corporate HR person sees you as family.
Is one of the few people to see how President Trump and President Putin interact when the cameras aren't necessarily around. Ambassador John Bolton was Trump's national security advisor in his first term, and it's great to have you here, Ambassador, because you've previously said that you believe Putin sees Trump as what you described as an easy mark. You were there for their first meeting in Helsinki. What are your expectations for this one?
Well, I don't have any expectations anymore. I think we know exactly what's going to happen. President Trump has effectively surrendered to Putin before the negotiations have even begun. The positions that Defense Secretary Hegseth announced in Brussels, which I'm sure I'd be stunned if Trump didn't convey them directly to Putin in their phone call, constitute terms of a settlement that could have been written in the Kremlin. Maybe they were written in the Kremlin and got out in propaganda channels. But it's a complete reversal of the U.S. and NATO position on a number of issues. For example, up until today, the official American position was that Ukraine should be returned to full sovereignty and territorial integrity. That's gone. The question of NATO membership as far back as 2008 had been that ultimately Ukraine would become a NATO member. That doesn't look like that's around anymore either. Putin has scored a whole series of victories today. It's hard to encompass them all, but I think one, in addition to these substantive concessions, is that he has now, it seems, exactly what he wants. Putin doesn't want to negotiate with Zelensky. He wants to negotiate with Trump because he thinks he'll get more out of him, and he's absolutely right.
On your point that you just made about not having Ukraine be in NATO, borders returning to what they were pre-2014, which Hegseth said was off the table, if a Trump official was here tonight and they argued, well, that's just being realistic, what would you say to that?
So why is John Bolton on CNN? And the reason why John Bolton is on CNN is because he's got the support of the military-industrial complex and the far-right neoconservative milieu, and that includes billionaire money, that includes think tanks, that includes warmongers. You know, the Bush-era people. And he wants to go to war with Iran. He wants us to go to war with Russia. He wants us to go to war with China. This guy is a psychotic freak. But he's being presented to criticize Trump from the right wing. The idea, and by the way, chat, we're just 7 subs away from 200 on the day. That's pretty good. 200 subscriptions on the day. God damn, that's good. God damn, that's good. That's crazy. Thank you, chat. If Trump actually ends with a few months, it will show a bunch of fucking clowns Democrats are. Oh, by the way, when let's imagine that Ukraine, you know, there's a peace treaty in Ukraine. There's a peace treaty in Ukraine, and they give up the Donbass region. They give up claims to Crimea. They say they're not going to join NATO. But Russia says we will not encroach any further into Ukraine. And everybody signs the deal. There's security guarantees between Europe and Ukraine. And then the war ends. How will that change your life? How will that change the lives of Americans and Europeans? Mike, what is a tanky? Tanky is something that your English leftists came up with in the as a response to the Soviet Union helping suppress a uprising in Hungary, and there was a debate within the left about whether or not that was a good idea or not. And the people that said that the Soviet Union was justified were called tankies by these British leftists. Now it's just used by illiterate liberals who don't know anything to describe anybody who thinks the United States should not be at maximum war all the time. Basically, people now describe doves. That's what we're called. We're called foreign policy doves. We want peace. We want negotiation. They're now calling us tankies, which is ironic because they're war hawks. It used to be war hawks and doves, right? Nobody wants to be a war hawk because that's very unpopular. So in a kind of perverted reversal, the war doves are now called tankies, even though it has absolutely no connection whatsoever to its historical definition. We're called tankies because we want peace with China. We don't think the United States should invade Iran. We don't think the United States should support the overturning of the democracy in Egypt or Pakistan. We don't believe that the United States should be giving hundreds of billions of dollars to Israel. We're now called tankies because of that.
I'd say that if you're going into a negotiation, you don't announce what's acceptable to you before it begins and give away positions. I tell you, I've done a lot of negotiation with the Russians, and there's no country out there that's...
Isn't it incredible how 2025 starts? There's a ceasefire in Palestine, potential peace treaty to Ukraine, Dems discredited and unpopular, Ethan declining and crashing out, Diddy G a confirmed sex pest and facing legal action. I know. People are like, Mike, why aren't you a doomer? And I'm like, everything I said is going to come to pass but I'm a socialist, baby. Which means I believe that we will win. That the workers of the world will unite. Maybe I will live to see it, maybe I won't. But I believe in my heart of hearts that one day the Scarlet Standard will fly over the surface of the earth. And we will be united. And we will build, unironically, fully automated gay luxury space communism. That's what I actually think will happen. Automated? Hell yeah. Hell yeah. This is your disagreement with Assad. He thinks nothing will get better. You think things will. Of course they will. I may not live to see it, but the contradictions of capitalism are there. And the powers that be are a lot weaker than we think. And class consciousness is an idea that will never die. Are you saying we shouldn't care about the oppression of peoples around the world unless it directly impacts my life? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the United States has actually made the situation in Ukraine worse by refusing to try to come to negotiated settlements, by interfering with Ukraine's internal politics, by trying to install spies and listening outposts, by being confrontational and warlike with regional adversaries. I think the United States should adopt the foreign policy that FDR had. It was called the good neighbor policy. We treat people with respect. We respect their sovereignty. We engage in mutually beneficial arrangements and trade and investment. But we respect their politics. We respect their sovereignty. That's what I believe we should do. That's what made America strong. America did not become strong because we ran around the world as a fucking empire. We're not the British.
Better at pocketing concessions that you make.
So we should have ignored Russia's aggression. Russia's aggression did not happen in a vacuum. Russia's aggression happened in a vacuum of the United States of America fomenting and encouraging it.
And then wanting more. We used to joke in Soviet arms control days about a famous Russian negotiator who used to greet the Americans every morning with a jovial, well, what have you got for me today? And that's what we're hearing from Russia. This is something Putin prepared the ground for. You know, last week he said he agreed with Trump that in the comments Trump had made in the election that the war never would have taken place had Trump been president. So he began the flattery campaign, the release of Mark Fogel, the American hostage, part of the flattery warm-up campaign, make Trump look like the center of attention. Belarus's decision to release an American and a couple others, part of the flattery campaign. It's obviously working.
Well, I can't believe Americans are being released and diplomacy is freeing people. This is terrible. We should go back to killing millions of Ukrainians. We should go back to 15 million Ukrainians fleeing their country as refugees all across the world. We should go back to ruinous inflation on consumer goods and energy. We should go back to the far right surging everywhere in Europe. Great fucking plan.
Said today also in his own readout of the call that he put out that Putin repeated back to him about using common sense to end the war. Do you think that that's part of that flattery campaign?
Right. Well, there was a tweet or whatever you call those things on Truth Social that said, Putin used my very effective campaign slogan, common sense. I think we all believe in common sense, but he noticed that Putin had picked up that line. It's another stroke of flattery. I mean, you got to say, Putin hasn't forgotten his lessons as a KGB agent maneuvering an operative around. And there are broader significances than just in Ukraine. This is a palpable harm to American national security, because what Hegseth and Trump did today was not only blow up the NATO position on Ukraine, they blew up a thing called the Belavasia Accords that Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia signed in December of 1991 that broke up the Soviet Union along the lines of the internal republics. So it means that not only is unprovoked aggression by Russia against Ukraine now okay, every other former republic in the Soviet Union is vulnerable to the same thing without any indication that the U.S. will do anything about it. And I think the people who are paying the closest attention to this outside of in Ukraine are in Beijing, where they see the United States unwilling to act against unprovoked aggression in the center of Europe. What are they thinking now about Taiwan?
If there is any chance that this works, when you look at the dynamics here, do you believe that there's a way that this could be successful, that it could end this war that has gone on for as long as it has now?
Well, I think it'll be successful for Russia.
By the way, what Bolton wants to do is Bolton wants to keep America and Ukraine and Europe at war, killing hundreds of thousands of people on both sides for years. Here's the problem. Here's the problem with if you're like, oh, Bolton is making sense. We should keep the war going. The problem with that is the Ukrainians don't want the war to continue. So it would be an anti-democratic imposition. A poll came out a couple months ago of Ukrainians, and 60% of them wanted to negotiate an end to the war. The Ukrainians are running out of men. Like physically running out of men that they can draft. The United States solution is they want to lower the draft age to 18. Up until this point, I think the Ukrainian draft age was mid-20s and older. I want to double check that real quick. Yeah, at age 25. There you go. Men are conscripted at 25. The United States was telling Ukraine, lower the age of conscription to 18 years old. And the Ukrainians said, no, we don't want to kill off the next generation. And so the reality is that eventually Ukraine's going to run out of men, physically run out of men. You know what the next thing they're doing? Ukraine is telling countries around the world that have allowed Ukrainians into their country as refugees to revoke the refugee status and force them back to Ukraine so they can be drafted. And the Ukrainian army is facing a massive desertion crisis. This is from 31 January, just a couple weeks ago. Everybody is tired. The mood has changed. The Ukrainian army's desertion crisis. Some of those abandoning the front line say the longer the war goes on, the more people like me there will be. So if you're saying, no, keep the war going, you're saying that you want to draft teenagers, you would have forced the Ukrainians to fight a war they don't want to fight, and you would have killed millions more and spend hundreds of billions of dollars. That is fucking insane. I would call that an outright evil position to have. This is Gallup research data, chat. Gallup research data. Half of Ukrainians want quick negotiated end to war. After more than 2 years of grinding conflict, Ukrainians are increasingly weary of the war with Russia. Gallup's latest surveys of Ukraine, conducted in August and October 2024, an average of 52% of Ukrainians would like to see their country negotiate an end to war as soon as possible. 38% want to keep fighting until victory. So the Ukrainians want to end the war. They're out of men. It's killing millions. It's destroying Ukraine as a country. It's sending tens of millions of refugees around the world. It's raising our prices. For what? Mike, is it true you have a servant from Eastern Europe, not unlike Bo, the fifth column, who serves you unasked for meals and you order via translation app? No. None of that is true. They're from Central Europe.
It's a war of attrition. Russia's the bigger country. I think 3 years of mishandling by the Biden administration, dribbling out
That's a joke
weapons assistance
about
one system at a time after months of argument, prevented a really strategic response to the Russian invasion. So there's a lot of blame to go around here, but the surrender is going to be signed by Donald Trump.
Can I get you just before?
By the way, it's not a surrender. It's a negotiated settlement. Ukraine is keeping the territory that they have occupied, that they could defend. Where the front lines are. That's not a surrender. That's a ceasefire. That's a settlement. Do you ever hear John Bolton saying Israel should give up the territory they annexed after their aggressive war in '67? Do you ever see John Bolton crying his eyes out about aggressive wars giving territory to American allies? No, he doesn't give a fuck. This isn't a principle that he believes in.
Swore in Tulsi Gabbard this afternoon in the Oval Office. Pam Bondi swore her in, but Trump was there, obviously, inside the Oval. How does that presence as the Director of National Intelligence by Tulsi Gabbard, do you think, shape the Trump-Putin relationship in a second Trump term?
Well, I think Putin couldn't be happier. I tell you, they're drinking vodka straight out of the bottle in the Kremlin tonight. It was a great day for Moscow. I think Tulsi Gabbard's role as Director of National Intelligence is going to be extremely harmful to our national security. I think many allies are now going to think twice before they share intelligence with us. I think it'll impair our ability to gain confidence around the world. All
of that is good. Even if he's right, that's good. The United States needs to be rebuked. And you know what the United States needs to do? Return home and focus on building up our own goddamn country. We've got a lot of real problems here at home that we should be spending our money on. We are not the imperial guarantors of every puppet tin pot dictatorship around the world. We need to come home. We need to focus on home. We need to build up our country. We need to spend money hardening ourselves against wildfires. I don't want to see Ethan Klein's house burn down in a wildfire. I want us to have the best wildfire fighting services in the world. I want us to harden against hurricanes. I want us to be hardened against earthquakes. I want us to be hardened against floods and natural disasters and polar vortexes. Why don't we harden the Texas power grid and connect it to the national grid so they don't have power outages all the time? Why don't we build renewable energy and clean up the air? Why don't we build high-speed rail crisscrossing America so that we can have high quality, high speed, green, carbon-free transport? Why don't we build ourselves high quality public and social housing so we don't have another homeless person on the fucking in this country? How about we fix our roads and bridges and infrastructure and public transit and hospitals? Why don't we build medical schools and dental schools so we have more doctors and nurses and dentists to provide health care for people? Why don't we spend hundreds of billions of dollars here at home making Americans better off instead of trying to guarantee the security of South Ossetia? That's insane.
It was one of his worst nominations, beyond a doubt.
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you for your perspective tonight.
Fuck, this is awesome.
Thank you.
Also here is the former Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Beth Sanner, and it's great to have you. You know what it's like to be in the meetings for these kinds of calls. We don't know about Zelensky's involvement in any meeting that Trump may have with Putin. We do know that Saudi Arabia is potentially the destination for that first meeting. What significance do you see in that, if any?
The Saudis are definitely playing this very well for themselves because the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, is saying no to Trump on a lot of things. He's saying no on Palestinians being forced out of Gaza. He's saying no on pumping more oil. And so here's something he can say yes on and be part of a solution. So there's a lot going on with that. But I think that the main thing about this is that this idea of just having Trump and Putin alone negotiating in Saudi Arabia is just a terrible idea. And they really need to turn this into proximity negotiations, just like with Hamas and Israel in Qatar, where they're there but not in the same room. That would be the right thing to do.
So you think it's not fair, or it can't be fair for Ukraine if they don't have a presence, at least in the same building or country?
It can't be fair, but it's also just this whole idea.
Listen, if Ukraine wants to keep fighting the war without U.S. support, they're totally free. They have sovereignty. Like, nobody's going to say, like, oh, Ukraine has to stop. We're not going to declare war on Ukraine. If they want to keep fighting the war, they can keep fighting the war. Like, and if you think that, like, they're not entitled to infinite American money and resources.
Idea that as Ambassador
Yeah, she
Bolton
made
said,
Qatar, guys.
one
Not
of
she said
Putin's
gutter.
main things is that he just wants
What
us
an
to be a
expert.
negotiation between the two great men, and the pawn on the table is Ukraine. This whole idea of spheres of influence and great powers can do whatever they want, and they can just go in and take a country by force. And President Trump said this, like, they fought for this land, right? And that means, as Ambassador Bolton said, what's next? It kind of opens up the whole Pandora's box.
Trump also talked about they agreed to go to each other's respective countries. Obviously, if Trump went to Russia, that would be the first time a U.S. president was in Russia since 2013. And if Putin came to the U.S., that would be the first time he was here since 2015. What would you be looking for? I mean, what does that say to you that it's been that long since either of those things has happened?
Well, I mean, obviously, war crimes and a war of aggression is what went wrong. But I would say this, look, I am not as extreme on this call today being the worst possible thing. I mean, there are two things.
You think it makes sense, actually?
I think it makes sense. Look, how are you going to end a war if you do not talk to the protagonist? This whole idea about order and
Protagonist? This woman is not very good with her speech.
all of that, I don't
And she was the DNI. Whew.
know. Look, he spent an hour on the phone with Zelensky.
The word she was looking for is belligerence, not protagonists. Belligerence. Belligerence. How do you end a war without speaking to the belligerents?
If you're not having translations, that's more time than he spent on the phone with Putin. You have Zelensky meeting with Vance, and you had the Secretary of Treasury there talking about an agreement which he described as a security shield. This is the economic, and he termed it economic and resource and security agreement. So there's something there. It's just some of these instinctive things that Trump says that, makes your hair stand on end.
Like what? What did Trump say today that made your hair stand on end?
I think that he basically said that Ukraine was the cause of this war. He said, I can't remember the phrase, Caitlin, you were there, but he said, that they should have not gone into this, I think was the phrase. It's like, well, I don't think they had a choice when the paratroopers were, going into the airport right outside of Kyiv.
I mean, like, okay. This is something that Americans frequently do. Whenever you talk about foreign policy, they do this like arbitrary date. There's no history before this date. And we look at this like obviously criminal act by Russia and say, see, Russia was undeterrable. Like, they don't even bother to say, like, oh, there's nothing that could have been different. Like, wouldn't Ukraine have been better off fully implementing the Minsk agreements? Wouldn't Ukraine have been better off saying we're not going to join NATO? Wouldn't Ukraine have been better off giving autonomy and respecting the rights of the Russian minority in Ukraine? Like, wouldn't it be better? Like, if they had fully implemented the Minsk agreements and then Russia invaded, that would be a different world. That's not the world we live in. We had an internationally agreed upon set of agreements, and Ukraine thumbed their nose at it and did not implement it. Okay? That is a reality. And the CIA was operating brazenly in Ukraine. It was trading the Azov battalion and other far-right militias in Ukraine. Like, we know this. This is admitted. So let's not pretend like Russia just out of nowhere invaded Ukraine. Now, I personally think it was a bad idea for Russia to invade Ukraine. I think it was incredibly damaging to Russia. And honestly, if you evaluate it fairly, it was damaging to Russia. The winners of the war in Ukraine are the United States of America and China. The losers of the war in Ukraine are the European Union and the Ukrainians. Why did China win? Well, because Russia was separated from the EU energy prices skyrocketed, causing huge economic downturn for European and especially German manufacturing. Because they lost access to cheap energy, they now can't compete with Chinese and American manufacturing. Chinese and American manufacturing is now cheaper than European. Europeans are getting fucked over because they have to buy expensive imported liquefied natural gas from the United States, which is much more expensive than the natural gas from Russia. Russia lost because they lost their biggest customers for their biggest products. Now they have to sell it to China, and China now has the ability to demand a discount because there's nowhere else to sell it to. So Russia is forced to be more of a junior partner to China. It's forced to cleave closer to China. They can't use European customers to bid up against Chinese customers. Now China is the only buyer. That's called monopsony. So China has a monopsony over Russia. I'm the only buyer of your resources. So they could dictate lower prices for themselves. So the Russians lose. The Ukrainians super lose, the Europeans lose, the Americans win because now we have a captive market for our natural gas, which is why we love the war in Ukraine, because they have to buy our natural gas and oil. We're the top oil producer. We're the top natural gas producer. So now that's more customers for our products that get exported right out of Texas. Right? But you know what the other advantage is? American customers get to pay higher prices because now Europeans are bidding against American customers for American gas. Congratulations. Your prices went up. You know who the real winner is? Oil and gas companies. Oil and gas companies win. Not Americans. I shouldn't have said America won. I should have said oil and gas companies won because your energy prices are going up. So Chinese energy prices go down. That's why China has had zero inflation, chat. Did you know that? China has had zero inflation from COVID. None whatsoever. And this is one of the reasons why. So China wins. Ukraine super loses. Europeans lose. Russia slightly loses. They gain some wins, right? Because they're going to win some territory. They're going to win international prestige. They're going to show that you could fight NATO and the United States in a conventional war and come out on top. Like it's a kind of like it's an L for Russia because overall it was really damaging and expensive and not worth it. But they get to at least save face, right? The United States wins because it doesn't really matter to us what happens in the Donbass region. You know, that's fucking crumbs. That's icing on the cake. Who gives a fuck? So China and oil and gas companies, that's who won the Ukraine war. Isn't that great?
How much of that do you think is the personal relationship factor in this between Trump and Zelensky and shaping his view of this, or Trump and Putin potentially?
You know, I kind of feel like this gets a little bit deeper into this idea of big, powerful countries and big, powerful people should talk. And small countries are weak. And they're, again, the pawns. So I think it's just this very instinctive thing that he can work it out with Putin and it will be okay. And, you know, there wasn't as much today that was said that is different than Biden. There were some important things that were, but Hegseth said those things in the context of a negotiated settlement. No one expects NATO to be a NATO membership as part of negotiated settlement or getting Crimea back. People want it to be frozen so things can be dealt with later.
Once Russian assets and arms are freed up from Ukraine, it will be interesting to see what role they take in the Middle East and Africa. Yeah, that's another good point. Is like there's problems with the French colonialism in West Africa. They're starting to rebel, and the Russians are assisting the Western Africans in fighting for their own sovereignty away from the CFA franc. Another big L